This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit. It's that gay cowboy movie that's arguably not about gay cowboys. It's Brokeback Mountain, and this film is lit. Hello and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. In this month, the month of our pride, we're talking about Brokeback Mountain. So for Pride Month, we are doing Brokeback Mountain. If you want to hear why we're doing Brokeback Mountain, you can go listen to our prequel episode where we discuss it at length, or at least to some length.
There was a bit of length.
Yeah, we had there's a few reasons. There's reasons we thought maybe we'll do a different one. And we ultimately decided, yeah, let's do it. And so, yeah, we're doing Brokeback Mountain. And we have all of our normal segments. So let's just get right into it with, let me sum up.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
This is Brokeback Mountain by Annie Proulx. Cowboys Ennis Del Mar and Jack Twist share a summer on Brokeback Mountain tending to sheep. During that time, they fall in love but eventually part ways. Over the years, both men have unsatisfactory marriages and children, seeing each other only occasionally. Jack wants them to set up a life together, but Ennis always has a reason not to. They have a falling out at one point and don't see each other for a while. Eventually, Ennis receives word that Jack died in an accident, although Ennis fears something darker happened, and all Ennis is left with are memories of Brokeback Mountain.
All right, here is a brief synopsis. Obviously, spoilers are incoming. For Brokeback Mountain, the film. Jack Twist and Ennis Del Mar are two young cowboys trying to make a living in the American West. They both get hired on to tend a herd of sheep in the Wyoming mountains. One night, after spending several weeks together, they begin a sexual and eventually romantic relationship. They both then go home and move on with their lives, marrying women and having children, but they eventually rekindle their relationship over the mail. Over the next 10 to 20 years, roughly, it's kind of not obvious how long this lasts, but for at least 10 or more years, the relationship continues during their brief fishing trips, quote unquote, that the two take together several times a year. Ennis's wife, Alma, who early on saw Jack and Ennis kiss in the very early stages, eventually ends the marriage between Ennis and Alma, and Ennis spends most of his remaining years kind of mostly as a bachelor, minus Linda Cardellini for a while. After one of their last fishing trips together, it is their last fishing trip together, Jack and Ennis have an argument about how they should have lived their lives versus how they ended up living their lives. The two leave on bad terms. It's the scene with the famous "I wish you knew how to quit you." Later on, sometime later, Ennis receives a postcard he had sent to Jack. It is returned to Ennis, and it is stamped deceased. Ennis realizes that Jack has died, and he travels to Jack's home to meet his parents. There he finds that Jack kept the shirts that they were wearing the very first time they left Brokeback Mountain all those years ago. He takes the shirts home, runs into his daughter, finds out she's getting married, has a nice little moment of remembrance looking at the shirts and a postcard, and then the movie ends. So that's what happens in the film of Brokeback Mountain. So, I have a feeling those were remarkably similar. Let's move on. My meta had more details. Let's move on to our game show portion and play Guess Who?
Who are you?
No one of consequence.
I must know.
Get used to disappointment.
Okay.
All right, so we have 3 Guess Who's.
I feel like this shouldn't be tough. Well, it could be. We'll see.
I feel like 2 out of 3 of them probably won't be tough.
Yeah.
Maybe.
We'll see.
All right, so our first one here. He had wavy hair the color of cigarette ash, parted down the middle.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay. Well, I'm guessing that's probably Ennis. I guess he has blondish hair. Jack has dark hair. None other main characters that I can think of have parted. Is that like white? I'll just say Ennis.
It's Joe Aguirre, I think. Oh,
the guy that hires him.
Yeah, the guy that hires
Randy Quaid.
him. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Isn't he bald in the movie?
He has like a real close buzz. I
think. I guess it's gray.
Yeah.
I guess
it is gray.
I just thought maybe he was going for more like a light blonde. I don't know, because I guess Ennis has blonde hair, right?
Yeah, it's like blondish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay. Next one.
I never would have got that guy's name. No. I don't know if we find it out in the movie.
They say it a couple times, but I think I only picked up on it because I'd read the story.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. The jagged hair, the big nicked hands, the jeans torn, button gaping shirt. He had a high arched nose and narrow face, was scruffy and a little cave-chested, balancing a small torso on long caliper legs, possessed a muscular and supple body made for horse riding and for fighting.
It's most like Ennis. See, the thing is, there's a lot of like big mixed with small, and I don't know, because in the movie, Jake Gyllenhaal's a little bit smaller, I would say, than Heath Ledger, and Heath Ledger's a little more like broad, a little, not a lot. And so but that kept going back and forth between like bigger features and like a narrow face, and then like a short torso on long legs. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go with Ennis again.
That is Ennis.
Okay. All right, cool.
All right.
Because again, the biggest differentiator in the movie to me is their hair color and their facial hair at any given time throughout the course of the movie.
Yeah.
Or their lack of sideburns or prominence of sideburns, because it is like the 70s and stuff a lot of the time.
Yeah. All right. At first glance, he seemed fair enough with his curly hair and quick laugh, but for a small man, he carried some weight in the haunch, and his smile disclosed buck teeth.
Okay, that one I assume is Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you see, he does see is small.
Yeah,
so he's
smaller than Ennis anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, you were right. 2 out of 3.
Now, if I had read that one first, would you have thought that was Ennis because of the curly hair?
No, I don't think so. I think I still, because of smaller, I think I would have thought that was Jack. I think.
Fair
enough. I could be wrong. I guess his hair is Ennis's hair is curly, but they all wear cowboy hats so much. I just know the color of their hair more so than like the shape and what's going on with it. Mainly again because of facial hair and stuff that you can see. But all right, 2 out of 3, like you said. That was not too bad. Let's move on to, was that in the book?
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
The what?
Honestly, don't you two read?
All right, I have a fair amount of questions. Tried to hit all the tentpole things of sort of the iconic moments from the film, and then a few other smaller things that I thought were interesting about the movie. And that's always what I do. And we're going to tell me if those things were in the book. And let's go with the first one, which is the dynamic, which I thought was interesting in the movie, is that so they both get this job, her attending this herd of sheep in the mountains.
So many sheep.
Yeah, lots of sheep. And the way they do it, the way Joe or whatever, the foreman, whatever, the owner of the sheep wants them to do it is that because he doesn't want the sheep to get eaten by coyotes in the night, he wants one of them to go up and sleep with the herd on the mountain every night, and then the other one to stay back at the main camp. So the person at the main camp basically stays there all day and like does the chores.
Right.
And then the person that goes up to the herd just goes up there and watches the herd and makes sure, they don't run off and there's no coyotes or whatever. And so I thought it was interesting that one of them literally goes and works and the other one stays and is the homemaker. I thought that was an interesting dynamic for this sort of the way their relationship is set up. And I wanted to know if that was in the book.
Yeah.
Okay.
The setup of that is exactly the same
Yeah.
as it is in the book. That they have the whole rule with the Forest Service where there's only particular places you can camp.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah.
And they can't camp up on the mountains,
Yes.
technically. So, okay. That's interesting. And I figured it was because it seems like a reasonable way of how you would do that. Mm-hmm. Now, Jack is upset in the movie that he has to sleep up on the mountain because that's not technically allowed.
Right.
But the owner wants him up there in case there are coyotes, and he's like, "Oh, look, I lost so many of my sheep last year.
Yeah.
Just don't light a fire." So he sits up on the mountain and freezes, and he's not happy about it. But all right, cool. Next one, we're getting right into it because most of the first 30 minutes of this movie is just them herding sheep and nothing happening.
Yeah.
And I figured that was similar to the movie or to the book. In the movie, they just go right for it. There's like zero prior flirting of any sort, really. I mean, arguably, I would say there isn't. And then they just one cold night, and it comes into the tent, and then they are just boom fucking.
Yeah.
That's okay.
So remember when we were sitting on the couch and I was reading and I had an audible reaction to something?
Yeah.
And you were like, what? And I was like, I wasn't expecting it.
Yeah.
That was that scene.
It's funny because my guess was that you were reacting to Jack dying. Because I remembered that in the movie, and I wasn't expecting that because it's very sudden and kind of seems out of nowhere. And so that's what I thought you were reacting to, but that's funny that's...
I was just, like, I think I was expecting more of, like, a slow
burn,
burn kind of a build, and then it was and then they were fucking, and I was like, oh.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that because I think it's interesting, and I think, I don't know, again, to me, watching it as a straight dude, it felt like at first I was like, wow, that's wild. Like that, like there's zero, they're just like they've talked a few times and then they're just having sex. But I was wondering, like, for these two characters, because then the second time they're together, they like start kissing and like cuddling and like being more affectionate.
Yeah.
Whereas the first time it's just like a pure like carnal like sexing.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, I was like, I bet that so if that's how it is in the book too, I wonder, this is again where like, it feels like it makes sense for their characters because it's like, it's almost like the weird internalized homophobia of the characters of like, it would be weird for us to kiss each other. But or like that seems more intimate to them and more for like perverse to them, for lack of a better word, than just like this like driven purely by like, you know what I mean, like carnal attraction, like let's have sex thing,
or like just need,
right?
Really.
Sure, yeah, you know what I mean. Like I was like, because at first it's like it takes you're like, whoa, wow, all right,
yeah.
But then I was like, oh, I guess I wonder if that seems right for these characters, maybe potentially.
Right. And I think I was expecting a slow build because that's like when I read material that has like intimacy in it, it's usually that type of like it's more of a slow build kind of a thing. So it caught me off guard a little bit. But then like, I mean, I feel like you kind of have to ask yourself, like, if you were watching a movie with a straight couple, a man and a woman, and then all of a sudden they just like went for it, would you be surprised by that? And I think the answer for me is no.
No. I wouldn't. It's just the nature of, you're right. It's not, I think the thing that is that we had seen the characters literally speak like 3 lines to each other. Well, I think more than anything, there was not, you get almost zero vibe of any sort of, again, but I think you're right to that extent that it is, if you think about it, it's not out. It wouldn't strike me as super weird for any characters to, or for straight characters, whatever, to immediately. But I think in the same regard, it would, in the same way. I actually think it's, when I thought about it, I think it would, honestly. Just because there was so little set up for, or preface to the first time they're together. To me, like at least more so than any other movie I could think of.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but that's how it struck me. But I also thought, after I thought about it, I was like, makes total sense to me. When I don't know. I thought it seemed like it did to me. I don't know. Could be wrong. It seemed like it made sense with the sort of gruff, because I think it makes sense because there was so little, that because they had said 3 lines to each other, that their relationship is also just as sort of truncated and like
and we could get into other issues about like expressing affection.
That's what I'm talking about, is that for these characters, they very clearly, and we find out more over the course of the movie, they come from backgrounds where affection was not something that was a part of their lives. And so that's what I'm getting at, is saying for these characters, just launching right into it makes sense.
I think it does.
You know what I mean? That's kind of what I was talking about when I was saying these characters with their backgrounds, that we find out, about their relationships with their parents and all that sort of thing. Right.
And then when you factor in like social upbringing for men in general, and especially the time period.
Yeah, because this is the 60s. Yes. In case I didn't mention that. I should have in my. I
didn't mention that either. It starts in 63.
So it's which I don't think I realized the first time I watched this movie. I thought, because like they drive old trucks and stuff, but like it wouldn't have seemed out of place to me if it was like the late 90s, because this movie came out in like 2005. If it was like the late 90s, and they're dirt poor, at least in it for most of the movie, or at least for the beginning of this movie, they're dirt poor. And I guess it was also a big thing of like just like cultural unawareness of what it's like to live in Texas or Wyoming. Like, to me, it may as well, like, when I see 1960s and 1970s Texas and Wyoming, I was like, that could be now. I don't know. Like, I know that's, that's not true, but like just sort of the cultural bias and like blindness that I have for that part of the country. And I mean, I'm driven through those places a couple times, but like,
well, and the version of, for example, Texas that we're exposed to through media does kind of on occasion look like it could be the 60s.
Well, and to be fair, most of what we see in this movie, like short of like the diner scenes, which are very clearly like in the 70s or 80s when they happen, or probably like the 70s, late 70s when we see them in the movie, like later in the movie when they're in diners. But even that, because the places we go, and that's one of the good things about this movie, or one of the positives about this movie, there are a lot of them, I think it's a great movie, but is the timeless nature of it, because even though it is set in the 60s, and they mention it several times in the movie, I think because of the locations it takes place, when there are cowboys up on the mountain, I don't know how much that even goes on anymore, but like I can't imagine it looks a lot different. With the clothing they wear. They wear blue jeans and button-down shirts and ride horses. And I mean, like the tents and stuff are probably again. I don't even know how much of this,
like some more
modern equipment and stuff, but not that much. And like again, I don't know how much that even goes on anymore versus like factory. I don't. Who knows? But. And then like they spend a fair amount of time at different times at like clubs or like bars and rodeos, and the country bar they go to in this, I've been to a country bar 5 or 6 years ago that looked exactly like it looks, you know what I mean?
And
like
it's interesting too, because I mean, like you could also say like, oh well, one of the bigger hallmarks of the time period is Anne Hathaway's hair.
Yes, the hair for sure.
But everything's bigger in Texas.
Right. That's
and
what,
there are still like people who wear their hair like that.
That's what I was wondering. That's the thing where it's like, I don't know how often this is a thing that like, or how normal this would be if you went to Texas right now, if women's hair would look like this. I mean, probably not many, but maybe. I don't know. Like the thing. It is for, and we're from the Midwest. We're not even like a coastal, you know what I mean? Like city slickers, but like, yeah, it's still just such a foreign culture to some extent to me.
I mean, okay, I would have to bet that there are still women in Texas who wear their hair like that. They're probably just older than she is. Women, because if you think about it, there are still some older women around here who wear their hair in that like big, like that big 1980s feathered.
Yeah. No, for sure. You're right. Yeah, they're just older.
They're just older than she is in the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, the hair is honestly the thing that most gives, and the clothing sometimes.
Like, to some extent, yeah.
After he gets married to Anne Hathaway, like the clothing. Because the rest of the time, again, when they're just cowboy clothes, they're blue jeans and like button-down flannel shirts and stuff. It's like that could be whenever. Like that doesn't...
It's some stuff, but then like Lisa Cardellini's character, I feel like I could go to a dive bar here and see someone dressed exactly like her with like the shorts and the wedges.
Yeah, I know. I know. It was interesting how timeless a movie that is so old, like set in the 60s. Yeah. Most movies that are set in the 60s and 70s, it's very obvious to me that they're
smack you in the face with
this one, it does at times, but I also I think it's because of, like I said, it's because it's set in Texas and Wyoming. It's like, I don't know. That could be now. That could be now. Anyways. Does a playful wrangling turn into an angry fist fight?
They do get into a fight on that last day, but the movie actually clarified this for me, because in the story it's mentioned like when they get back down and they're getting, the foreman is paying from them. It's like, oh, Ennis has a bloody nose and Jack has a bruise, and I went back and reread it, and it doesn't say what happened.
Well, oh, really?
And I was like, all right, I guess they got into a fight.
Yeah.
So the movie actually helped me out there.
Okay, yeah, because in the movie they're sort of playfully wrestling, and then it turns into an actual fight.
Emotions run over.
Yeah. Which is interesting. I think it. I think in the book having it not spelled out also works. You can just kind of assume.
Yeah.
It's pretty but you see it in the movie. Does Ennis marry a woman and have an unruly amount of children?
Yes and yes. He only has 2 children in both the book and the movie.
Does he not have like 3 or 4 children in the movie?
He's got 2.
Really?
But they absolutely cannot handle their kids, so I can see how you would interpret only 2.
I thought they had like 3 or 4.
No, they've only got 2.
Those kids are everywhere, I guess. I guess part of it maybe is because we start time jumping a lot around this part, and so they're different ages, and I wasn't sure, like, was that the same girl from earlier? Yeah, I think that was part of it. But, all right, fair enough. Speaking of the time jumps, are there unannounced time jumps in the book? Because in the movie, every time, I think we get a placard in the very beginning of the movie that says, like, Wyoming 1963, maybe. Or even if we do. And then we don't get another one the rest of the film.
Yeah. No, the time jumps are real subtle. And the aging on the main characters is real subtle. Obviously, the kids age up.
Yeah, the kids are the most obvious tracking. But they very rarely say exactly what year it is currently. Yeah. And again, there's definitely never, like, placards saying, like, 3 years later, or 4 years later, or 1 year later.
Now it's 1975 or whatever.
Does that happen in the book, or is it announced in the book? Or
the story definitely does time jump, but the markers are a lot easier to pick up on. Okay. For one thing, there are text breaks when there are time jumps. And almost all of the time jumps start with like a summary of like what's been going on in the intervening years, which is a lot of the places where the movie expanded. Yeah. And there are like kind of more obvious markers of time passing every now and then in the short story. There is one point near the end where they say that specifically says that it's 1983. Yeah. So we know that it's been 20 years at that point.
Okay. And we'll talk about it here because you don't have it later. I really, this is not something I noticed the first time, was the sort of unheralded time jumps, but I think it's one of the most fascinating and well crafted parts of the movie. Watching it this time is how they don't tell you how long it's been, and then all of a sudden, and a lot of times if you're going to do a time jump like that in a movie, even if they don't announce it, a lot of times you'll get like a fade out and a fade in or something like that, or a very distinct cut that makes it like you'll cut from somebody's face to them 5 years later of their face, and that makes it very obvious immediately, X amount of time has passed. In this one, the way it's edited is you'll end a scene at one point in time, and then it'll be 4 years later, but you don't even realize it's 4 years later while you're watching until a minute or two into the next scene. Like, you're a ways into the next scene before you like can put together the pieces of the outfits and and then talking about things or whatever that, it's been years since we last saw these characters. And I thought it was super fascinating because I think what it does, and I think it drives home really well, really effectively, one of the central themes of the movie, which is in sort of that last big conversation that they have on their last fishing trip. They talk about how Jax talks about how, we could have had this life together. You didn't want it. We've been coming up here fishing for all these years, but we could have had a farm together or a ranch together and just lived together and been happy. But we did this thing. And I thought it was a really effective way to drive home the idea of your life slipping by you without you even realizing it.
Yeah, that time can just melt away.
Because they and especially that they that they're not one of the central themes being to take advantage and to live in the way you want to live. Because the time never jumps when they're together. It always jumps whenever they leave each other. Yeah. And I think that, again, it sort of drives home the idea that this their lives are slipping away from them because they're not together, and that and they're not living their best lives, basically. I think, that kind of idea. And I thought it was really fascinating because you're watching because you feel that same way of trying to keep track of what happened? Now we're 5 years later. What happened to the last 5 years? Yeah. They got me. That's what the characters are supposed to be thinking. All right, Ang Lee. Damn. Well done. I was really blown away by that this time. And it wasn't something I noticed the first time watching the movie. And because it is really subtle at times with how you don't even realize sometimes how long it's been until somebody says something or you see their face or something really up close, and that I don't know. I thought it was fascinating, and so that is a part of the book. But it sounds like to me that might be more effective in the movie, getting that theme across, because you don't get the more obvious
I agree
breaks in where the time jumps ahead and that sort of thing, which. I think this is the only movie I've seen that I'm sure it's not the only movie that does that, but I think it's the only movie I've seen that does that in a way that services one of its central themes so well. It's such a distinct filmmaking technique that complements the story writing.
Yeah, the story, the themes, everything
so well, and it was just. And it's such a minor thing. And I thought it was so unique to this film that I was just blown away by it this time. Anyways.
What's interesting too is that this is one of those times when I think potentially having read the story first maybe did me a disservice, because I wasn't able to experience that in the same way that you did, because I knew that there were time jumps. Right. And I was watching for the hallmarks that I knew were coming for those time jumps. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I could see that for sure. That if you know they're coming, you're like, oh, okay, well now.
There's the mustache.
Yeah.
It's been approximately 5 years.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Because it is a really interesting movie going experience. It reminded me a little bit of another movie we did. Elements of that. I had a similar experience watching it when we watched. Where the Wild Things Are, about aspects of the filmmaking that were
being really complimentary
to the themes that they were trying to get across, which doesn't always happen in every movie that we watch. But in this one, it's just very glaring. And it probably also helped that I'd seen the movie once. Again, it was 15. I was in high school 10 years ago or whatever. But anyways, cool. Does Jack have a baby with a barrel racer horse lady?
Anne Hathaway's character is in this story. They do get married. They do have a baby. There is no mention of her being a barrel racer. Okay. So
I think that's interesting in the movie. Makes sense.
We never meet her character.
Oh, it's just he says.
Yeah, he just says, I married so-and-so. We have a baby now.
All right. So after years of being apart, Jack and Ennis finally reunite at Ennis's home. And when he gets into the parking lot, they go and hide behind a wall and passionately make out. And Alma sees them because they're terrible at having an affair.
They're the worst hiders.
He goes to hide, but doesn't think to hide from, which I guess there's maybe some interesting messaging there. He goes to hide from the world, but doesn't go to hide from his wife because she's sort of an afterthought.
He hides from the street.
Yeah.
And not from,
All right. I now that I say that out loud, I can see the inherent messaging there. But still, terrible at having an affair because she just sees them. Does that happen in the book? She just like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Great.
The exact same thing happens.
Cool. Quick content warning for the next few minutes. We're going to discuss homophobia and violence for just a couple minutes as part of a plot point in the movie. You can skip ahead just like a minute or two if you don't want to hear that. Thanks. There's a horrifying moment in the movie where Ennis retells the story of, as a boy, how his dad took him to see the body of there was a gay couple living in town, and one of them was murdered, and his dad took him to see this.
I think that's important too. Allegedly gay.
True,
because we don't actually know.
Yeah, that is fair. They say he lived, basically him and another guy lived on a farm together, a ranch together, and we have no confirmation of whether or not they were, but
But suspecting that they were gay enough.
They were murdered because of it.
Yeah.
His dad takes him to see the body of that the man that was murdered. Mm-hmm. Does that happen in the movie? Book. Sorry, does that happen in the book? It happens in the movie. Does it happen?
Yes,
in the
it does.
Because that's a very pivotal character.
Yeah, this is
point for Ennis.
Obviously where a lot of his fear and anxiety stems from.
Yeah. And it also gives us it's a very quick way to give us an insight into the type of upbringing Ennis had. Mm-hmm. I mean, because we don't hear much about his family other than his parents died in a car accident at some point when he was young, and he was basically raised by his brother and sister, I think it says brother and sister. But in the one brief sort of interaction or, moment we get from his childhood before his parents died, it's like, oh, okay. That's the kind of house you grew up in. Yeah. Cool. All right. I love this scene in the movie. It just makes me chuckle. So Lorraine's dad is being a shithead. And
he's a big shithead.
He's a big shithead. And he keeps turning on the TV during Thanksgiving. And Jack keeps turning it off because Lorraine asked him to turn it off. And then his dad goes to turn it on, Lorraine's dad goes to turn it on one more time. And he says, "Sit down before I knock your ignorant ass into next week." And I just enjoyed that scene, and I wanted to know if it was in the book.
Oh, no, that scene isn't from the book.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Also, because her dad then just like meekly sits down. Yeah. It's like, okay. Sorry. Next question, and we got to talk about this on a couple layers because this is interesting. Your note made me confused, and I think we need to talk about it. So, in the movie, at one point, Jack tells Ennis that when they meet up for like the final time in the movie, and they're sitting there discussing kind of their lives over the last while, Jack says that he was seeing a woman behind Lorraine's back.
Yes.
And I was making sure I heard that right.
Yes.
And I thought that was really interesting, and I want to talk about it for a couple things. But does that happen in the book?
Yes.
Okay.
He, in the same fashion, just tells Ennis, "Oh, I'm seeing this other woman behind my wife's back. Surprised her husband or my father-in-law hasn't caught me yet. Yeah. Blah blah blah." Okay,
and your note here.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so when they were kind of setting this up, remember when they were at like the dinner club with the other couple?
Yeah.
And the two wives were complaining about how husbands never want to dance with their wives.
Yeah.
And I felt like Jack and the other husband were like looking at each other.
Oh, they are.
They
100%.
They 100% are. And then and then it cuts to like after dinner, and they're both sitting outside.
Yeah, and he says, "Their wives haven't come."
He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "I have a fishing cabin that I go."
Detective Hopper, by the way, that's from Stranger Things. Is that actor?
He's like, "Oh, well, I've got a fishing cabin up in the woods. It's real private. I go up there," and I was like, this movie's gonna switcheroo, and they're gonna make him have an affair with the husband instead of the wife. That's so interesting.
He did.
But then he tells Ennis...
I think he's lying. This is what I was... Okay, this is what I wanted to talk about. Because at first I was like, wait, what? But then he says, at a moment later after he says that, he says something about... Or Lorene does. Somebody has a comment after he tells Ennis that he was seeing this woman behind his back. Somebody says, his mom, when he goes to visit his mom. Mm-hmm. When Ennis goes to visit Jack's mom and dad. Jack's dad or mom, one of them says, he talked about bringing you up here to start a ranch. Mm-hmm. And then, just a few years ago, he told us about bringing the husband of one of his rancher friends or something up. And I think it's implied that that's Hopper's character. I think he did. I think what happened... Okay, so at first I was like, this is just further comfort. I thought that was really interesting. When I initially hear the line of he's saying, I'm sleeping with this other one behind Lorene's back, I'm like, okay, well, this is like blatant, obvious confirmation probably that he's bisexual.
Yeah.
I mean, it would, I don't know, but it would seem strange to me to step out on your wife with a woman if you're not attracted to women. Like that would, you know what I mean? Like that seems strange.
Seems like a lot of layers of like burying that.
Yeah, because again, you can, and we'll talk about it later on here in our discussion about whether, people argue are these characters gay, are they bisexual, are they somewhere else in the, or other some label apply. But I was going to argue that I think it would be safe to argue in that instance that if he was telling the truth there, it would probably be safe to not just say he's not just gay.
Yeah,
you would think, because again, you get the idea of why they're married to these women. You could make the argument that for the culturally to
this is
a
what
beard,
I'm
for
supposed
lack of
to
a better
do,
term,
kind of a thing.
Yeah. So I married to women and I have a kid because that's what society expects of me, and that's what I'm going to do. And then but it would seem strange to me to then go out and cheat on your wife with a woman if you're not attracted to women.
I mean, unless he's taken it really deep down society expects me to have an affair,
right?
So here I go.
Right. But what I think is actually happening here is he's lying. He's saying that what actually was happening is he is having an affair with Detective Hopper. Uh-huh. But he doesn't want to tell Ennis that because he knows Ennis will get jealous. Yeah. But he knows Ennis won't get jealous if he says he's having an affair with a woman. They'll chuckle about it and
Mm-hmm. I like that interpretation.
I think that's what's going on.
I see, because I think that's really interesting. And I thought it was interesting when they were setting that up. And then I didn't have that analysis of it. So I was kind of just like, oh, okay, I guess that's not what they were doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's potentially more interesting.
Yeah, because then they have their big fight the next day or whatever, and Jack says to him at one point, you would something about you would kill me if you knew the things I'd done or something something implying that he's been with other men and this would be very I think that's, and again then the confirmation later with either the dad or the mom, I'm pretty sure they're explicitly talking about that character. When they mention it. And so I think that is what's going on, and that he was just lying in that moment. But maybe not. You could read it both ways. He could also, again, because if he is bisexual, he could have just been having an affair with that woman. Although, and we'll talk about it more later, he seems less bisexual to me, reads less bisexual than Ennis's character does to me in the movie, potentially. And again, we'll have a lot of notes on it later with different people's quotes and critics and academics and that sort of thing, kind of discussing it. But anyways, I thought, so it could go either way. Like he could. It's a terrible joke.
God. Get out.
All right. A couple couple lines. The famous lines happen here back to back, which in that scene, he says, after they're talking that night by the lake, he says, "Sometimes I miss you so much I can hardly stand it," which is one of the more famous lines from the movie. Is that in the book?
I couldn't find that specific line. I went back and I skimmed over some places where they have private conversations. I couldn't find that one.
Okay.
So I don't think so, but I might have missed it. Just my little disclaimer there.
Disclaimer. Might have missed it. What about the big one? The most famous line from this movie, the most memed line of the early 2000s. I wish I knew how to quit you.
All caps, yes.
All right. In the book, I wish I knew how to quit you. Does Jack die unexpectedly and sort of off camera, as it were, when a tire explodes? And does Ennis get a postcard about it?
Yes.
Not even a postcard about it, but
yes.
a postcard notifying him.
Yeah, he gets his own postcard back. And it's stamped deceased. Yeah. Which, can we talk about this here? Is that actually a thing?
Probably maybe a thing like in the 60s. I don't think that's a thing anymore.
Well, here's the thing that was weird about it to me, was that, like, so he was married to Anne Hathaway still. Yeah. Like, they weren't separated.
Yeah.
Right?
No.
So he would have been living with her.
Yeah.
So, like, because I could see where, like, if it had been Ennis that died and he was just like living on his own, where maybe the post office would just like stamp it not deliverable, deceased, and send it back. Yeah. But if you're living with someone, like if there's somebody else there to handle the mail situation,
I could see a couple possible explanations for that. One, maybe back in the day, they were more specific, because now, and I don't know, this is all speculation about how mail works, but maybe back in the day they were more specific about who the letter was addressed to. Whereas today, literally, we get mail from the last 4 people that have lived in our house. You know what I mean? Like,
and sometimes it looks important.
Right. So, like, maybe as long as the name is irrelevant these days on mail, as long as the address is the right one, they'll stick it in your mailbox. And now maybe back in the day that was less so. Maybe it also has to do with so that's one explanation, is that maybe that has something to do with it, that when an obit comes out, or not an obit, they death certificate, whatever, who knows. Maybe Jack had a different, and now I didn't look specifically at the postcard. Maybe he had like a P.O. box or something that he was using for this, so that
was more
Lorene
private.
wasn't seeing it or something.
That's fair.
Or another address or something. Like maybe he was sending it to like some cat. I don't know. Who knows? So maybe that, and then that would come back. Or the other thing is that maybe Lorene, she says on the phone that she didn't have a way to get in touch with him, to contact him and tell him. Maybe she got the letter, took it to the post office,
and thought, I'm not going to deal with
this. I'm not dealing with this.
Yeah.
Just put deceased and send it back. Yeah. So those, I don't know. Those are 3 possible explanations that I don't know which of those would.
If any of you listeners are U.S. Postal Service.
And especially were U.S. Postal Service workers in the 70s or 80s, even better.
Or if you're for some reason really into the history of the U.S. Postal Service, we'd like to know about this.
My grandpa was a mail carrier.
Was he? I didn't know that.
My dad's dad was a mail carrier. Got his buttock bit off by a dog.
Really?
One time. Yeah. At least that's what I've been told. I don't know how true that is. Could be.
It's not like a family tall tale.
Yeah, it could be completely made up. I don't know. That's what I remember. I could even be misremembering. It could have been one of his friends or something. I don't know. Yeah. I remember hearing that story. All right. I wish I knew how to quit you. No, we already talked about the tire exploding. Yes, in the movie. Does Jack keep Ennis's bloody shirt? And then does Ennis get it back at the end of the movie?
Yes and yes.
Okay. That was interesting, because in the movie, he's like, oh, I left my shirt up on the mountain. And he's like, oh, yep. Oh, too bad.
I want to talk more about that later.
Okay. And then the final line of the movie, after Ennis agrees to go to his daughter's wedding, be part of the wedding, he goes back inside. And he goes and puts, because his daughter left her sweater there, and he goes to put it in the closet, and he opens it, and it's their 2 shirts are there, and then it's got like a postcard of Brokeback Mountain or whatever, and he says, "Jack, I swear," and then the movie ends. Is that how the book ends?
That line is in there.
Okay.
It's not exactly how it ends, because the last scene of the story is actually him buying the postcard with Brokeback Mountain on it, okay. To set up with the shirts.
Gotcha. Okay. What do you think that... I guess this could be more of a lost in adaptation, but what do you think the Jack I swear means? Because I thought that was interesting in the movie. I assume it's like it's a moment of he's like it's sort of like what's the words I'm looking for here? Camaraderie with Jack about his daughter, because he's just got this kind of abrupt news that his young daughter is getting married, and it's kind of taking him aback, and he's like, oh yeah, I'll be in your wedding, and it's all this kind of like, and he's like, oh boy, Jack, I swear, like, is that the implication?
I think in the movie maybe. In the book, to me, I just looked back at it, it comes off more of as like, I swear I won't like forget your memory or like the time that we shared together, because he sets up so he goes to like a gas station or something to look for a postcard, and they don't have one with Brokeback Mountain on it, so they order one for him. So when it came, 30 cents. He pinned it up in his trailer, brass-headed tack in each corner. Below it, he drove a nail, and on the nail he hung a wire hanger and the 2 old shirts suspended from it. He stepped back and looked at the ensemble through a few stinging tears. Jack, I swear, he said, though Jack had never asked him to swear anything and was himself not the swearing kind. And then the last paragraph is about how for the rest of his life he just like dreams. He has dreams of Jack.
Okay. Huh. Interesting.
So to me that comes off as more of like a
because the line memory, after,
yeah, kind of a thing.
Yeah, which in the movie it feels, the way he delivers it, almost more like a commiserating, like like, I wish you were here so I could talk to you about this. Like, you know what I mean? Like, like, not I wish you were, you know what I mean? But it's hard to explain because it is such a specific choice of 3 words that is very strange to me.
And I have more thoughts on that later.
All right. Well, that's all I had for Was That in the Book. So let's move on quickly to Lost in Adaptation.
Just show me the way to get out of here and I'll be on my way.
Where is it lost?
Yes, and I want to get unlost as soon as possible.
I don't know if we get more of this in the movie or in the book. So in the movie, they're taking the sheep herding. I didn't understand this, and I feel like the reason I didn't understand this, I think I started to slowly over the course of the movie, but in the opening scene, they speak nothing but jargon. Like the foreman or the owner of the sheep speaks like nothing but jargon at them about like the sheep and what he wants them to do with the sheep. And I didn't understand. At first, I thought they were herding them somewhere. Yeah. But then it turns out they're not. But what they're doing is I think what they're doing. So I want to know what they're doing with the sheep and why.
So there's no additional explanation in the book, but I think the idea is that they send the sheep up the mountain to like graze for the summer.
Okay, that's what I gathered eventually. Okay. Because initially I thought they were herding them somewhere, which is why I was really like taking them somewhere. But then I was really confused at the whole like sleeping in different places part didn't make any sense. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like if you're traveling somewhere, you would just sleep in the same place. But with the taking them up on the mountain to graze, and then that makes sense. And I gathered it over the course of the movie, but I was just and then it especially was made clear with them like bringing them back at the end of the summer and stuff. I was like, okay, that's what was going on. Yeah, they take them up there to feed them. And I guess it was also interesting because I was also wondering like if this is still a thing that's done. Like, are any sheep still like grass fed on the side of a mountain, or are they all just like factory fed? Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. I thought it was interesting because it seems like I'm sure there are some. It's probably a very niche
maybe
thing. But see, now I wonder if these sheep are in the movie. Are those sheep? They're sheep, so they're probably just using them for wool, or are they using them? Are they being eaten? Or anything?
I would surmise wool. I don't think it. I mean, it's not super common to eat mutton anymore. No, lamb, sure. Yeah, but mutton, not so much.
Interesting. Okay, because that's also interesting though, because then I wouldn't see the grass-fed part being a particular selling point for the wool.
I mean,
you could argue like for like compassionate animal shepherding or husbandry or whatever, like them being free range type of thing being compelling to some people buying wool clothing or something. I can see that, but it seems like a...
Well, I think there could... And just to preface this, I know zero things about sheep or animal husbandry, or the history of either of those.
You know
things.
as much about sheep husbandry as I know about the postal service in the 60s. So,
but I feel like there could be factors of like, maybe commercial farming just wasn't as much of a thing.
Yeah, I'm sure that's also the case. Yeah,
yeah. Or maybe they're in Wyoming. Maybe there just isn't good pasture for sheep, so they have to send them up the mountain.
Yeah.
Maybe it's all being taken up by cows. I don't really know.
Yeah. No, I agree that I assumed it was more common back then. I know it was more common back in the day. I was wondering just if it still happens. Like if it's a thing that happens with any regularity
I have no
still.
idea.
That's what I was wondering.
And I don't know, because I think sheep are, they are like mountain animals.
Yeah.
So
I don't know.
maybe they just don't do well on flat surfaces. Again, I know nothing about sheep.
Yeah. All right. My only other Lost in Adaptation, and I think there's definitely an interesting discussion to be had here, is that it's less to do about animal husbandry or the postal service. At the end of the movie, when Ennis finds out that Jack died, he's on the phone with Lorene, and she's telling him what happened, that he was pumping up a tire and exploded, and he got hit in the face with the hubcap or whatever, and bled to death, basically.
Yeah.
Ennis then has like we see he has like a flash, like he imagines this scene where Jack is murdered.
Yes.
Beaten to death. And I think in the movie we're not to assume that's what happened. Or we're to assume that's not what happened, but that's merely sort of Ennis's fear and imagination running away with it. Mm-hmm. Or do you think that is what we're supposed to think is what happened, and that she's coming up with a story, or doesn't know, or you know what I mean? Or
well, okay, so
or that it was like covered up, and that's what she was told.
Right, it plays out the exact same way in the book that it does in the movie. Like that's the story she gives, and then he imagines. Like, here's this other scenario that could be like a cover up for.
Yeah.
And it's ambiguous. Like, hey, most likely it was just a freak accident.
Yeah.
But there's always the chance that it wasn't.
Yeah.
And then the whole way the scene plays out is so like palpably colored by Ennis's fear.
Yeah.
That you're kind of left with this like off kilter, like, Yeah. Maybe this did happen, but we don't know.
We don't know. Interesting. Yeah. It's leaving it be a thing that is ambiguous, but also because of Ennis's fear about this very thing is more compelling since it is ambiguous. I think that makes it more terrifying.
Yeah.
Maybe. Which is obviously not good, but it's a more compelling, like,
right, it's a little bit more to chew on with your brain.
More brain chewing. All right, that was all I had for Lost in Adaptation. Let's move on to Better in the Book.
Would you like to read?
Oh yes, I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
All right, I only have a couple things for Better in the Book because as I have said, or as I have alluded to, I don't know if I've actually said it yet. This movie is the book, just like expanded upon.
In our prequel episode, I read the quote from the author, and she said that she felt she's the only author in the history of the U.S. or the history of the world that has ever seen her work come to life one for one on the screen or whatever.
Yeah, so it's incredibly close.
Yeah.
The guy who hires them to herd the sheep, I'm
Randy Quaid.
No longer going to try to pronounce his name.
Just call him Randy Quaid. It's Randy Quaid.
He reads in the book, not that he isn't like a slime ball in the movie, because he definitely is,
much a slime
but
ball.
he reads more like almost like a weird used car salesman, but like with sheep.
It's funny because
which I thought was kind of interesting.
He looks like a used car salesman in the movie, kind of. And I think he reads that way at times because he is like Mr. Bottom Line and that sort of thing. So I think it comes across a little bit, maybe just not as much as you felt like it did in the book. Because I think it comes across in the movie, like, you know, he's just worried about the bottom line. He's making them do illegal things to, you know, by sleeping up on the mountain with the sheep, and he doesn't care that he doesn't want to do it and all. You know, he's just worried about how much sheep he'll have left to sell. But yeah. And the other implication with him, which I have this in the movie, Nailed It, and I probably should have moved it, but the other thing that made him feel like maybe like a little bit more of a skis slimeball grosso. So there's that one moment in the movie where he sees them through binoculars. Yeah. Which the movie I felt like implied was because he was already on his way up there. Yeah, it does, because he's coming up. Well, at least that's what it seems, because in the movie he watches him, and then in the next scene he rides up on his horse and said, "I was coming up to tell you that your uncle's dying," or whatever. Right. In the book, the implication is more that this is just something he like does regularly, is like watch them with binoculars. Yeah. Which is weird. Yes. And it's very strange. Well, and again, I think that you could read that as creepy, but also just going back to his sort of used car salesman, making sure that they're checking in on his investment to make sure, you know, that they're all them sheep. Yeah. All right. So one thing that I didn't feel like the movie went quite hard enough on, and it does go hard on it, but not hard enough, is just how fucking poor they are, especially Ennis. Like, as a way of example, like the first night they're up on the mountain, Ennis takes off his cowboy boots and he doesn't have socks. And I thought they were going to do it because they showed like Heath Ledger, he starts to take his boots off, and I was like ready for it. I was like, he's not going to have socks. But then he had socks. Oh, yeah. But like he wears rags. Yeah. And I feel like it didn't come through quite as well. No, as it does in the book. No, I mean, something like that would be it'd be a very clear. Yeah. I mean, now they say it numerous times in the movie. I mean, and maybe that's the thing. That would be a very clear showing versus telling. They say a lot of times in the movie about how he's poor, and he says, you know, at the end of the movie, he's like, you know, when he's yelling at Jack, he's like, you don't remember what it's like to be poor and that sort of thing. Yeah. About how he has to work all the time, and then eventually once he's raising all the kids, they're obviously, you know. He's a part-time cowboy, and Alma is a part-time or maybe full. Who knows? But she works at a grocery store, so they're not exactly. And they're raising 2 kids, so they're pretty much constantly poor. But I think that would have been a good way. The lack of socks is a good early, because they do it with Jack with his truck that doesn't work. Right, like he comes up and his truck is like sputtering and dying, and he kicks it and. Then it takes, you know, when they leave after it takes forever to get it started again and stuff. So the socks thing would have been a very, it seems strange that they didn't include that. Yeah. I agree. Okay. And then my last thing is something that I'm actually torn on. I don't know if it's really better in the book. I just stuck it here. So the story actually starts out with Ennis as an old man in his trailer. Like remembering Jack, and then the whole story is essentially a flashback. Oh, I'm very sternly in the movie is better in that regard. That was the thing. I think it works really well in the story, but I agree with you. In movies, I often find that setup like kind of cheesy and like not super satisfying. I think it depends also on what the story's trying to do. Like, I think it can work in movies without being cheesy. I think in this one, with the nature of what we talked about earlier with the time and slipping by and all that, if we start at the end point and then we work our way back to that, it would feel less... I think thematically it wouldn't work as well because we already see him alone as an old man and know that's the end. Yeah. Whereas in the movie, when we're watching it, we don't know how this relationship's going to end. We don't know where this is going. We're rooting for them to just be together. You know what I mean? Right. Like but then the reason that I think that works maybe better in the story is because there's not so much of that focus on time slipping by.
in the story.
Right. It is a slightly different.
Yeah, so there's, by having that non-linear starting at the end and then going back to the beginning and working our way back to the end, it sets up kind of almost like a dramatic irony where we, the reader, know that this ends up really sad and depressing, but we can't help rooting for them anyway. Yeah. Kind of like reading Romeo and Juliet after you know the ending.
Right. And that can work, or watching Titanic, or you know, that. Well, in that regard, it's a little different because they could have survived. Like both of them technically could have. We don't know, you know. But I think in the movie, I think it's more compelling in the movie. Like I get that, and there are movies that do that, and it works. There's lots of movies that do that, you know. But I think in the movie, it's way more compelling because you don't know, and you know. I think if we knew, it's just not as interesting. Like their whole journey just becomes slightly less compelling. You can still do it and it can still be really good. I just think, and also the thematically, like we said, with the time slipping and all. No,
for all their similarities, I think the short story and the movie are still doing slightly different things. Yeah. So changes like that make a lot of sense, and it's not necessarily better or worse because they're doing different things.
Yeah. All right, time for the movie Nailed It.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
Okay, I'm just going to skate through these because we've already talked about a lot of them.
This is like your biggest section, though.
Yeah, but we've already talked about a lot of them.
Yeah, we have talked about a lot of them.
Okay, the setup where one of them has to sleep in the pup tent up with the sheep, and the other one keeps house. Ennis's backstory about how his parents died and then he has to quit high school because their truck broke down, which is like the saddest fucking thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Jack playing harmonica, that's out of the book. Although he's better at it in the book.
Does Ennis get annoyed with it in the book?
It seems like not, because like he plays harmonica and Ennis sings in the book.
So that's a pretty distinct character change. Well, not necessarily, but like I don't think we ever see Ennis doesn't strike me as a singer in the film.
True.
He's much more reserved, introverted kind of guy.
Yeah.
He dances a couple times when he's forced to, but he's not much of a singer.
And I think that is something that they could have done to show him like loosening up and relaxing around Jack.
I do think that would be a criticism of the movie a little bit, especially when you say that. I think it would make him a slightly more realistic, fleshed out character. Not that he's not in the movie. It's just he's a little one note, gruff, reserved.
Yeah.
And again, we see it a couple times kind of come out. And we see it, I guess we do see it a little more in the movie at times when they're like wrestling and playing and doing that sort of thing where you see him being a little happier.
The first time they have sex, we talked about.
Yeah, we talked about that.
And then the whole exchange afterwards where Ennis is like, this is a one-shot thing. I ain't no queer.
Yeah.
That's like right out of the short story.
Yeah.
And then kind of like the progression of their relationship where they go from like, just in the tent, and then they're like outside and they're kissing each other and like wrestling around.
Yeah.
The scene where the sheep get mixed up with somebody else's sheep happens in the story.
That looks like a nightmare.
I know. How would you... What? Does it even matter at that point?
As long as you got the same amount.
They're like... I mean, I guess as long as they weren't like different breeds of sheep.
Well, they say Chilean sheep, but I assume that's just because of...
Look the same to me.
Oh, wow. All right. Jeez. But no, but I assume that when they say Chilean sheep, they mean because it's like the ranchers or whatever are Chilean or something. But maybe they are different.
Yeah, maybe they are. Maybe like the wool is different or something.
Yeah, I don't know.
But all of the sheep in that scene in the movie, which is what I meant.
Yeah.
Excuse you.
Sorry.
Look the same to me. They do not look like different breeds of sheep. But what do I know?
But yeah, they drag them around
about sheep. Zero things.
Trying to find the brands on them or whatever.
Ennis getting sick after he and Jack part ways, or he has like a violent physical reaction.
I was going to ask about that because that was interesting and so that is, and because in the movie I couldn't tell if he was just violently like crying / upset or if he was sick or because at first I was like, is he like is this going to be some plot point that he like has like cancer or something? You know what I didn't know. I was like, wait, what is going on? And then I was like, oh no, it looks like he's just like upset. Mm-hmm. And so it is just like a physical reaction to being upset.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
The kiss when they see each other again and Alma seeing them, Ennis's flashback, horrifying flashback with his dad. The Thanksgiving scene where Ennis is overeating with Alma and her new husband and their kids, and everything that goes down in the kitchen between them is like word for word, beat for beat. Yeah. Which we'll talk about in a bit. Jack's mustache. Mm-hmm. I wish I knew how to quit you. Yes. In that entire falling out scene. The postcard we talked about. And then we talked about the ambiguity of not knowing exactly how Jack died and what happened with that. Yeah. So most of the movie. Yeah. All right. A few more things and better in the movie, and then we'll get on to... Well, we have some more stuff to discuss, but let's do better in the movie first.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
All right, so this is definitely one of those times when I think visuals are really just a nice thing to have for a story. Seeing the mountain, seeing the massive flock of sheep. Seeing like the ways that they interact with each other and the subtle ways that they show emotions. Mm-hmm. The bit with the bear disrupting the supply run and then having to hunt a moose to get food, I think was kind of a nice way to show them bonding.
And that doesn't happen in the book.
Doesn't happen in the book. I don't think this line is in the book. I tried to find it. I couldn't. I don't remember reading it. You may be a sinner, but I ain't yet had the opportunity. Mm-hmm. Jack going up and lassoing Ennis while he's sitting on the ground. Cute, adorable, very cute. The bit more explanation for why they fought on that last day, I kind of liked having that. I felt like it was a little abrupt or like jarring to read in the book. Like all of a sudden I was just like, well, why does he have a bruise? Okay. I can't believe I left my damn shirt up there. Actual explanation for why Jack has Ennis's old shirt in the end, because they don't set that up in the story. He just goes up into his childhood bedroom and he finds the shirt and he's like, he has my shirt.
And you're like, what?
And you're like, how, what? When did he get it?
Yeah, in the movie he took it off because it was bloody and changed shirts.
So they set that up. They don't remind. Yeah. But they do set up.
Yeah. Yeah, don't they?
I don't think they. No, there's it's set up, remind, payoff.
Right.
And they skip remind.
Right, which works in a sense. I think that can actually work sometimes for certain. I think you can break that rule for something like this, where it's intentionally an insignificant thing, seemingly insignificant thing, that then becomes a super significant thing. Mm-hmm. I think in this instance, breaking that rule actually works because you do. It's a scene it's not something that you would forget about watching the movie. Mm-hmm. The fact that they have this fight and that that sort of thing, and then so when you see that at the end, I think it hits harder without having the reminder in the middle, and it would be awkward to figure out a way to work that in.
And I think now that I'm thinking about it, you could argue that they remind. Because they have the flashback when they have their falling out and they like flash back to that first summer on the mountain and you see Ennis wearing the shirt.
Oh, yeah, you do.
So I guess that's kind of a remind, but it's a real subtle remind. So I feel like it still works. Yeah. So getting to see more of Jack in general and like what he's up to and what his thoughts are, because the story mainly sticks with Ennis. It's like it is third person, but I would argue it more as like third person limited because we're mostly with Ennis.
Gotcha.
And we don't ever we occasionally go to other characters, but we never actually go to Jack that I can recall. Okay. So getting to see more of him, and then I had a couple specific notes, like we get to actually see the scene where the foreman refuses to rehire him.
Yeah.
Because he's gay.
Yeah.
Instead of in the short story, we get it secondhand from Jack much later, and then we get like all of the scenes with Anne Hathaway's character, and especially that Thanksgiving scene.
Yeah.
And like it was nice to me to see Jack like finally lose his temper instead of just like biting it back all the time.
Yeah.
And of course, then we have a little bit more like character and backstory for Lorene in there as well.
Yeah, her as a
so we can
racer and
get a better understanding of like what his life is in these intervening years than we do in the short story. And then the bit at the end with Ennis's daughter is not in the story, where she comes and tells him that she's going to get married.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really nice. And I thought it was a really nice way to show that he has kind of learned to be present in his loved ones' lives and like be present in the moment and like appreciate what he has and what's going on.
It is definitely a completion of his, to some extent, of his character arc as somebody who very much was never had a hard time being present and had a hard time being emotionally involved with anybody.
Yeah.
And then Jack has changed that in him.
Yes.
Over his relationship with Jack has changed that. So now in this final scene, he is able to, because I mean, we see it early where there's a moment with his two daughters, and it's a little moment, but he's walking by and they're on the swings, and it's played as a joke, but I think it's sort of sets up or establishes what's going on there. He has just been fighting with Alma, and his daughters are on the swings, and he walks by and they're just sitting there staring at it, and he goes, "Do you need a push or something?" And they just look at him, and then he just walks on.
Yeah.
And it's fun. It's kind of played as a joke. But anyways, and I think that having that, it's really interesting that that's not in the book. I didn't think to ask that, but because I just assumed it was, honestly.
No, I thought it was a nice moment. It was a nice wrap up for him, and especially because I got the vibe in the movie. We don't see a lot of him interacting with his kids in the book, but in the movie, I got the vibe that like he wanted to be a good dad, and he just didn't know how.
Yeah, I think even that scene that I just talked about is, I think he wants to, but he also doesn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
And just he's like, "Do you need to push or something?" They're like, "What?" And he's just like, "No, okay." He just doesn't know how. All right. That was it for Better in the Movie. We have some odds and ends to discuss, and then we will get to the final verdict. So let's do that.
Hell yeah, getting repeatedly slapped in the face with country western culture. Gotta love that.
Yeah. My note is the idea of living in a place where everybody is wearing a cowboy hat inside a bar is so foreign to me. There's one of the scenes where they're at like the line dancing country bar, and every single person in the bar is wearing a cowboy hat.
Yeah. And not just a cowboy hat, but like a bedazzled cowboy hat.
Yeah, like a 10-gallon bedazzled. I can't not fathom being in a place like that. It's just so strange to me. Like, that is as foreign as any. Like, it's one of those things where it's one of those things that, a lot of times people like really shitty people talk about a culture and about how American culture and how it's sort of an argument against immigration and the mixing of cultures and this really shitty perspective. And it's so fascinating to me that somebody can live in America and say that America has some sort of homogenous culture that I'm like, when I look at these people at a country bar with 10-gallon hats, that is as foreign to me as any other country. You know what I mean? Like, I would have just as much in common with those people as I would if I went to like anywhere in like the China and like was just like, I literally think we would have as much in like that. There's no, so to me it's so fascinating and so wrong-headed to be like, these cultures are incompatible. I'm like, or like, what are you talking about? It's ridiculous. And on top of it, it's like there is no American culture. American culture is a bajillion different things. Like, it's so weird. And that was one of those things. It's just like, this is so foreign to me.
Kind of on that same note, similar note, something that I thought was interesting, like a visual aspect of the film, was the difference between Wyoming and Texas. Yeah. Because like Wyoming, what we have is the clearly like the poor, like gritty version of this like country western aesthetic. Yeah. And then Texas is like glitzy and showy and like everybody has money and their western clothes are like very clean.
Especially because the vision of it, Texas, the part we see is the business owners. Yes. And like we're seeing like the farmers and stuff, like the wealthy farmers, because Lorene's dad sells like expensive farm equipment and makes good money. And so I'm sure, that's the part we see in Texas, which is interesting. It's two different versions of even that similar type of lifestyle, or culture type of thing. But it is interesting. There's some random people show up in this movie that I thought was really interesting. I mentioned Detective Hopper earlier, but also, and you mentioned Linda Cardellini, but also Anna Faris is the one who's married to Detective Hopper. And it was one of those things where it's like, I didn't remember all these really distinct, to me, like really particular people were in this movie. Yeah. Like that are like, and like like Linda Cardellini and Anna Faris are like, I guess they do both, but do a lot at that point had done like, and kind of after that were like a lot of comedic type of actors. And then they're like, and it's just it's one of those things where it's like very, like, it's this big Academy Award nominated film. And then this is like the girl from Freaks and Geeks at this point in like 2005. And like Anna Faris is like, what had she even been in at this point? Like, I'm trying to remember what, the Scary Movie movies were like her biggest thing at this point, probably. And then I don't know what Detective Hopper had been in at this point. I'm sure he'd been in stuff, but like my first introduction to him that I was like aware of was Stranger Things. I know he was been in plenty of stuff before that, but nothing that I was really watching. So it was just very fascinating watching this movie again and be like, oh, especially because we just got done like watching Dead to Me the other day on Netflix, and I was like, oh look, Linda Cardellini's in this movie. All right, cool.
Oh, can we just like?
Oh, and Kate Mara.
Oh yeah.
Which is weird. She plays the daughter, the older daughter.
Can we just talk for a second? We don't need to talk about it really, but I just want to mention how awful Anne Hathaway looks blonde. Yes. Like peroxide blonde. It's not a good look.
No. And I think I would bet that a lot of that has to do with the type of blonde that is that like peroxide, like terrible. But it's not the most flattering hair color on her. Let's see. I wonder if she had, because like Linda Cardellini's blonde in this movie too, but hers is like it's not more. I think it's also dyed, but it's like a mixed, like kind of like dirty
kind
blonde.
Of a dishwater.
And I would wonder if Anne Hathaway would look better there like that.
Probably.
But I don't know, because Linda Cardellini looks good with the blonde hair in this movie. But it's interesting. Yeah, it was not a good look for Anne Hathaway. Although I think that's partially on purpose.
It was probably on purpose, but it really just does not suit her.
No. And speaking of hair and makeup, the subtle old age makeups in this movie are really good. I don't remember if this was nominated for makeup, but especially on in several of the scenes on Heath Ledger's character, I thought was like really...
Yeah.
Like well done. Like when it's like 20 or 30 years later, it's just a little bit around his eyes to really age him up.
It's a little around his eyes, like both of them.
Yeah, both of them.
And then they gave him like, like a little bit of a spare tire.
Yeah, but I thought it was really subtle and worked really well to just look, because they were both pretty young.
Yeah.
And and especially when you compare to how they looked in the beginning of the movie. It's like a stark difference, and they look so completely different. Because Heath Ledger was 1979, and this is 2005, so he was 26. So or when they were filming, he was 24 probably, or something like that. But let's talk about Alma.
Yeah, let's talk about Alma. one thing that I kind of wanted to watch for
Yeah.
as we were reading this, as I was reading it, as we were watching it, was whether or not there was any kind of like humanizing of bigotry, homophobia.
That's a problem that tends to happen a lot of times in that was, I think, a fairly big criticism of Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which I did not see.
And also
but
Green Book.
Green Book. And it's definitely a problem that Hollywood for sure has.
Yeah. And I think it's a problem, especially too, when you have somebody telling a story about a marginalized group who is not a member of that marginalized group. I think you can have that and not even realize that you have that.
And so we're going to talk about it here. And since we are also neither part of this marginalized group, we may not be as cognizant of it as other people. But we did want to keep an eye out for that. And I think that we both kind of agreed that the main character where that seems to come across, if you're watching this, where you could read that, is with Alma. Yeah. Because she does say some pretty homophobic things at certain times. Specifically
in the scene in the kitchen at Thanksgiving. Yeah. Because it's really the only time that she ever confronts him
about
the fact that he's been having a years-long affair during their whole marriage.
Yeah. And the movie definitely, so that where it gets complicated is the movie definitely depicts Alma, Michelle Williams' character, in a sympathetic light. Yeah. Because she is being cheated on. And she is in an unloving relationship. Later on. They seem to have a fairly loving relationship when we first see them. But later on, and we know she's being lied to and all that thing. So the movie definitely is trying to give us make us feel sympathy for her.
Right, at least at some level.
On some level. And she is, and she does say homophobic things. I would argue maybe, and that being said, I thought that a lot of what the movie did actually didn't humanize a lot of the bigotry in it for the most part. Now, again, I thought hers was you could probably make the most compelling argument for her character. But like, I thought it was really interesting that a lot of the different characters I thought the movie, one of the things it did well, that a lot of times movies don't do well, and I could be wrong about this, because I think this was a problem with Green Book, and I guess I could see. So in Green Book, I know one of the criticisms was that like the people who are bigots in Green Book are like overtly racist,
like almost cartoonish
racist villains, and they say overtly racist things to the black character's face. And then and then Viggo Aragorn comes and saves the day or whatever. I haven't seen the movie, but that's the sort of what the vibe I get. I think this movie, it seems to me, does an okay job of having not just the cartoon levels of race or of bigotry, whereas there is that with some characters. There are characters who overtly call people, homophobic slurs and things like that a few times, but a lot of it is a little more subtle and like, again, even when, because like one of the things I thought was interesting is that when Randy Quaid's character doesn't hire back Jack, he makes it clear, he couches why he's not hiring him back by saying, I paid you up there and watch the sheep. And you let blank amount of them die. He also says that you guys, he implies, he says he knows that they were sleeping together up there and that sort of thing. But he never outright calls him a homophobic slur. Right. And so it is to me, I thought that was a more nuanced, like realistic,
it's a more reined in.
Like, yeah, you're still it's still awful. But here's the thing. We're not supposed to feel any sympathy for that guy.
Right. The movie doesn't let him off the hook. No, he's still a slime ball.
He's a slime ball, and we're supposed to hate him. And you feel no sympathy for that character. But I thought it was interesting I thought it was well done that he's not just come out and go, I don't hire F words, like he just goes, he kind of couches it with like, I'm not hiring you because you didn't do a good job watching my sheep, oh, you're gay. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that felt like a realistic portrayal of that isn't just the outright, because again, that can be like a silly cartoon, like, because then it gives people cover. It gives people that do have harbor those feelings of bigotry. If they in a movie where the only bad people are the ones who just run around overtly using bigoted slurs against people,
right,
and like fighting and like punching gay people in the face. It gives cover to everybody else to go, well, I don't do that, so I'm not.
Right.
I'm not a bigot.
I'm not that bad.
I'm not that. I'm not a. Yeah. The bigots are the ones who go around punching people in the face and calling them N-words. Like, that's bigots.
No,
like,
I agree with you. I think it is important to have portrayals of a more subtle, like insidious, and kind of like that more reined in. Depiction of bigotry.
Yeah, and it happens a lot in this movie. When he's at the bar, even, there's a lot of moments where like people just kind of look at him and sneer and like give him a look, and they can tell like when he kind of hits on that one guy, but the guy doesn't like punch him in the face and call him, a slur. He just goes back and says something to his friends, and Jake Gyllenhaal just leaves because he's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I thought that was all like really well done and sort of nuanced portrayals of like the different ways that that can affect somebody that's not just, this overt thing. But going back to Michelle Williams' character, Alma, the wife of Ennis, it does get a little muddy there because, again, she is, of all those other characters, the movie doesn't want us to be sympathetic with any of those other characters. It does with her character. I think you had an interesting point, though, that about their relationship that I think kind of makes it even more complicated than just we're supposed to sympathize with her and she's a bigot. Like, I don't know, with the nature of their relationship being as volatile as it is, like, because also in this moment, like, Ennis is like assaulting her. Yeah,
he has a violent reaction.
Yeah. Which, again, understandable, potentially, to the fact that she's, being outright homophobic at him, and the emotional reaction that happens. I think the movie's trying to portray their relationship as just a deeply flawed one that was never going to work, maybe. Yeah. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know. It is complicated, but I think that Michelle Williams' character, that Alma would have been, I think she's just as her bigotry feels to me less motivated by bigotry than by her anger and betrayal, and that's the way she knows how to, like, and maybe I'm defending it. I don't know. I don't think I am, but like, I feel like because he's cheating on her with a man, I think she would be just as mad and say just as mean things if he was cheating on her with a woman. But I think because it's a man, she's using the vernacular she has to express, and it's terrible. But like, but I don't think the movie then goes, and it's okay that she called him those things. Or that it, you know what I mean? I don't know.
I would tend to agree with you.
I could disagree. I don't know. I could be wrong. I don't know.
I think it's a goddamn bitch of an unsatisfactory situation.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right about that.
Because I do think you're right that even if he had cheated on her with a woman, I think then in confronting him, she probably would have still lashed out in anger and probably would have said a nasty thing about that woman. Yeah. Like, would call her a slut or a homewrecker or whatever. Yeah. And I think where we're trying to split hairs here is, like, is it worse because it's arguably a more, like, it's a bigoted thing? Yeah.
Wait, say that again.
I don't know.
Okay. No, yeah, you could be right. Maybe it is worse because it is how she chooses to lash out. That's interesting. Maybe that is because the fact that the way she doesn't lash out at him. I guess I can see it both ways, but I'm the enlightened centrist. But But I think I can see what you're saying, that the fact that she does choose to lash out that way and not about you lied to me.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm trying to read into her that is what she's actually mad about, and that it, yeah.
Well, yeah, I think it is. What is she mad about?
Yeah.
Is she more mad that she was betrayed, or is she more mad that she was betrayed with a man?
Yeah.
And we'll never know.
We'll never know, I guess. I guess you're right. I guess that is what it kind of boils down to. To me, it felt like she was more upset that she was betrayed, or that, he lied to her and stuff for all this time, is how it felt more like to me. But I can see watching. I can absolutely see watching it and feeling like that we're supposed to sympathize with her in spite of the fact that she's saying these awful things, and feeling like that's not great because it's not.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's complicated. I don't know. It's one of the reasons I think the movie's really good and well done, is that it's not a simple to pull apart and sort of, you know what I mean? To me, all the characters in it feel very real and nuanced in the way they react to the sort of weird, and then it's all couched. You got to go back and then it gets even more complicated to me because of it is 1960. It is
right.
It is Texas or Wyoming. Like it, I don't know. I don't know. To me, it makes it even more complicated in how all of these people react. Like what? And again, cancel me, I guess. But like, this goes back to my determinism thing of like what. My point was going to be that what chances does Alma's character have growing up in that situation to not grow up a bigot?
Yeah, what chance does a poor woman growing up in Wyoming in a very conservative place in 1963 have of being able to articulate her anger in a way that doesn't automatically reach for something horrible?
Yeah, bigoted language. I agree. And that's a whole other thing, but that is very complicated. But I think that, it's definitely something to consider. What you would like to see, and you don't get to see it in this movie because it's the last scene she's ever in, is that if she ever comes to a place after that where she realizes and learns or understands, because, if she gets to a place where she's able to realize that her anger was in the wrong place, or maybe motivated poorly, that she shouldn't have that she is harboring these weird feelings, and that maybe I don't know.
I think to me, like, yeah, you made the point that him having a violent reaction could be the movie showing that this was always an unhealthy relationship. It was always going to be an unhealthy relationship. And I don't disagree with that. I think that point can stand. But for me, him having that violent reaction, and he does in the short story as well.
Yeah.
I want to make that clear. This scene was very, very little changes.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like it was even very ramped up at all from what the short story does. Yeah. But like, to me, having him have that violent reaction makes it worse, because I feel like I'm supposed to feel more sorry for her in that moment, Yeah. So I feel like they could have even changed his reaction in some way.
Yeah, you're right. No, you're right. Yeah, because if he reacts more level-headed, or not level-headed, but
if he reacts,
we'll
say wounded.
Yeah,
my thought.
That's what I meant. Yeah,
if he reacts like she has just cut him so deep, but not violently.
Yeah,
But then I feel like it makes sense for his character.
That's the thing. It makes sense for his
violently.
character. His character has always solved problems by
Yeah.
punching it or whatever. Like
Yeah.
that's just,
And what chance does his character have of somebody who grows up dirt poor and doesn't have a good father figure and then has no father figure? What chance does he have of not solving his problems with his fists?
Katie wanted me to make it clear here that when she says father figure, she's referring to any sort of parental guidance, whether it, regardless of gender or anything like that. She's using the shorthand for father figure because we see his father in the movie. So that was kind of why she said that. But we're talking about just any sort of adult or person above them who can help instill good values in them. I'm slowly converting you.
I never disagreed with
I know. It's a conflict.
Don't agree on all points.
I know. I'm joking. It's the thing that I think that to kind of put a cap on this. It's been a long discussion about all this, and I have a little bit more I want to talk about. I think to put a cap on it, I think the movie. I think you can argue. I think I totally reasonable to watch this movie. Watch a scene where. A character that we have grown to like over the course of the movie and feel sympathetic for says hateful, awful things, and we're still supposed to feel sympathetic towards her. I can totally understand watching that and feeling grossed out by that and not liking it. I think you have to maybe try to weigh that against the movie as a whole and the messaging of the movie overall, whereas every single other character that we see that expresses those couple things. One, the context of the time and the place is one thing, but also every other time we see a character act hateful and bigoted, they're expressly coded in the film as not good and not sympathetic. Yeah. Literally, she's the only one. Everybody else, Jack's dad, everybody in the bars that they run into, the guy at the beginning, Randy Quaid's character, everybody who who says awful things, or not even says awful things, sneers or they're all coded as just like
not
bad.
Great. Yeah.
And so I think when you weigh it as a whole, I think the movie very clearly comes down on the side of not sympathizing with bigots. Like it feels like it. I think there is, you can argue that it's a little messy with her, but I don't know. I think the nature of the relationship between the two of them makes that more complicated than just, well, she said hateful things and we're supposed to sympathize with her, so this movie is cool with sympathizing with hateful people. I don't think it's quite that simple, but I don't know.
And I think, too, you can go off of that, too, and read it as kind of like, isn't this just sad?
Yeah.
Isn't this just sad that this culture that they've both come up in makes it impossible for them to be happy?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the themes of the whole freaking movie is, and why the movie takes place when it does, is that, that the culture that they're in and where they live and when means that they are robbed of the chance of being happy.
Yeah.
And it's not anything they can do about it, really. I mean, they technically kind of could maybe, but not really because, Yeah, I agree. Last thing I wanted to talk about in this before we get to the final verdict, and okay.
We thought this would be a short episode.
Mostly. That was part of it was just like 20 minutes. So I'm going to talk about this is interesting. First thing, in 2015, The Hollywood Reporter polled Academy members on controversial past decisions, and Brokeback Mountain won the revote for Best Picture.
Well, hindsight is 2020, I guess.
This is the year that Crash won, and people were not excited about it. Talking about the sexuality of the two main characters, which we talked about a little bit at times. I have some different stuff here. So this is interesting because this gets into a couple different topics. It gets into like bi-erasure and other things, but also it's okay. So a lot of different layers here. LGBT nonfiction author Eric Marcus dismissed, quote, talk of Innocent Jack being anything but gay as box office influenced political correctness intended to steer straight audiences to the film. Now, here's the thing. I get where he's coming from in regard to if you say if your marketing and stuff is like, no, they're not gay, or when Jake Gyllenhaal and Heath Ledger talk about how they think they're straight men in this, like, I get what he's saying in that regard, but it does feel a little bit like talk of them as anything but gay. Well, they could be bi, or they could be pan, or they could be like, just whatever version of queer they like, but like, it felt, but I think in the context of what he's talking about there is not pushing back against that so much as pushing back against the idea that they're just like straight dudes.
Right.
Like, so don't worry, conservative people, they're not gay. They're straight. They're just in a, like, you know what I mean? Like trying to spin it some weird like way, I guess, like, but even that, it's all complicated, but because even that, I think you could argue. I think there's legitimately a place to argue, but then the labels get weird and you probably just call them bi. It's like, I think there's potentially a place to argue that you could be quote unquote a straight person and have a sexual relationship with a man once. And I maybe not. Maybe that just fits into bi. That's fine. And I get that. But I think if it was like one person who were like, for whatever reason was like this distinct thing, that feels different to me than like I'm attracted to men and women. Like I'm attracted, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't disagree. I
don't know.
I think labels should be up to the individual
to
decide.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and that's the thing that makes it interesting though, because I think Heath Ledger's kind of right in the sense that with these characters, they don't even know, they don't have a word for gay. They're just like potentially, you know what I mean? Like, I mean they do. They certainly, I don't think would have had a word for bisexual. No, and definitely not pansexual. No, so no, they definitely would have been. Yeah. And it does feel very much like there are moments in this movie where it very much feels like Ennis is absolutely bisexual. There are one of the early scenes with him and Michelle Williams. The movie doesn't, at least in the portrayal by Heath Ledger, there's moments with Jack where he feels uncomfortable with women, where it reads his interaction with women and his sexual interaction with women feels uncomfortable, that we're supposed to read it as somewhat uncomfortable. In the relationship with Michelle Williams and Heath Ledger, I didn't get that feeling, except for later when they have all kinds of marital problems because he's cheating on her and things have blown up. But in there, they have a love scene very early in the movie that feels absolutely like they're both equally into it. Yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah. To the regard to where it feels like, okay, then I think it would be safe to probably not say he's just a gay man or whatever. Maybe, I don't know. I thought it was interesting though. What's interesting about because I got that reading in the movie too. Yeah. But in the short story, I actually read it the opposite way. Really? Yeah. I felt like Ennis was more coded like clearly gay, and Jack was more coded like maybe he's a little more like bisexual. Interesting. But we also don't actually spend any time within Jack's perspective. Yeah. So that's through the filter of Ennis. Yeah. Annie Proulx says, whose story is the basis of the film, said, quote, how different readers take the story is a reflection of their own personal values, attitudes, and hang-ups, end quote. Which, that's true of every story ever about anything. I love that, though. That is, because that is classic, like, old guard author. Yeah. You push it off on the reader. Yeah. That's your problem, not mine. However you took it is how you took it. I don't know. It's like Tolkien. There is no message in this. Yeah. Yeah, okay, Tolkien. It's so different from, like, kind of like the new guard author, like the J.K. Rowling-esque type of where they want to, like, control every facet of the story. Yeah. And then finally on this, sex researcher Fritz Klein said that the film was, quote, a nice film with two main characters who were bisexual, end quote, and suggested that the character Jack is more, quote, toward the gay side of the spectrum, and Ennis is, quote, a bit more towards the straight side or bisexual side. I don't know if that makes sense, but well, I guess he probably has more knowledge on that than I do. Again, I think your point is Fritz, the sex researcher. Yeah, your point is correct that labels are only as important in that regard as to how people want to be labeled, and so label yourself how you want, and I'll call you that. All right. Anyways, let's do the final verdict.
Now,
Are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first, verdict afterward.
All right. So I've talked about this, but this was kind of a wild adaptation for me because it was really just the short story, almost shot for shot.
Yeah.
The things that they expanded on are there. They're in the text. They're just like asides, or they're summarized really briefly within that short story. There are very few things added to the movie that aren't somewhere in Prue's original text.
Yeah.
Now that said, I think I am going to give it to the movie.
Okay.
I think expanding the story helped it, in my opinion. Especially like the expansion to seeing much more of Jack's character. Like I said, in the story, we really only get Jack through like an Ennis filter. And seeing him on his own, I think emphasized both the similarities and the differences between the two characters in a way that was meaningful,
Yeah.
I think, and helped to tell the story and helped to convey the themes.
Yeah.
And I think seeing more of both of their other relationships was also helpful because it fleshes out those two main characters. And I think it allows them to be human in a way that the text simply didn't achieve. We can see their emotions. We can better understand their motivations as they wrestle with like what they want to do and what they don't want to do and what they feel like they're supposed to do.
There you go. The movie is better. Katie called it. All right. What do we have coming up next, Katie?
We are continuing with our summer series.
That's right.
And we will be talking about so we'll be talking about The Two Towers.
Yeah. Which I'm excited for. I've started reading it already. It was my favorite one of the three movies for a long time, but it's not anymore. I don't think. I'll have to I'll see upon rewatching it, but I am interested to watch it again because it's been a while, and I'm interested to read it because I don't remember. I remember even less of this book and the third one.
Yeah.
So, Two Towers coming up in 2 weeks. We'll do a prequel episode before that in 1 week. As always, you can rate and review us on iTunes, Stitcher. Nope. I don't know if we're back on Stitcher or not.
I can't figure out the situation with Stitcher. We apologize to anyone who was listening on Stitcher. We don't know what's wrong with it.
If you're listening on Stitcher, I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on. I thought I fixed it. It was like a link thing. I don't know. But hopefully it's fixed. I haven't checked it in a while. But anyways, if you rate and review us anywhere you listen to us, that would be great. Also, you can follow us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, and we have a subreddit. And until next time, guys, gals, non-binary, and everybody else.
However you want to label yourself.
There you go. Pick it.
Keep reading books.
Keep watching movies.
And keep being awesome.